Europe Out Loud, a podcast about Europe's history, culture, and civilization. Brought to you by the Martens Center, with Federico Reo.
Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of Europe Out Loud. I'm Federico Reo, Research Officer at the Martens Center for European Studies. Let me introduce the question that we have chosen for this podcast. Is capitalism immoral? It's not a new question, it's actually probably as old as capitalism itself, but it is a very topical one. We all are familiar with the discussions that have followed the recent financial crisis and the Great Recession. There has been a negative mood towards capitalism in the public opinion of many countries. And I would like to anticipate my conclusion. My conclusion will be that no, capitalism is not an immoral system. And in fact, many of the issues it is faulted with are the result of misconceptions, of myth. And I will try in part of the podcast to burst some of these myths. At the same time, capitalism is not a perfect system. In many ways, I will argue it is an amoral system. It is neither moral nor immoral, and it needs to be moralized from outside. So the first myth about capitalism being immoral is the following. Capitalism is about capital, which sounds natural enough given the name, but in fact, in many ways, it's a misnomer. It goes back to the early students of capitalism at the beginning of the 19th century, who believed that the main feature of this system, compared to previous or other different economic systems, was the fact that it accumulated more capital, was the accumulation of capital. That's why they named it capitalism. In fact, subsequent economic histories has proven to us that there are systems, for example, some socialist countries that can accumulate capital, especially physical capital, as fast, if not even faster than capitalist systems, and now we know better what is capitalism. Capitalism has to solve the basic economic problem of all societies. What is this economic problem? There are unlimited human wants that have to be satisfied using limited means. So who decides what wants are satisfied? This is the basic economic problem, and there are different possible solutions to it. Some system, for example, socialism or feudalism, put some people in charge of deciding which wants are satisfied first. Capitalism is different insofar as it empowers individuals to signal in the market through their consumption choices which needs should be satisfied first. By their willingness to pay for certain goods and services, consumers and consumers' preferences determine what goods are produced in a capitalist system and how these goods are produced. And then competition, profits, prices direct producers to supply the goods and services the consumers want to produce. So capitalism is not about capital, it is about consumer preferences, prices, profits, and competition. Second myth about capitalism being immoral is the notion that capitalism is a form of economic oligarchy, meaning that it empowers the few at the expense of the many. This is another very common myth, but it is as far from reality as it can get, because in fact capitalism is the purest form of economic democracy. In the capitalist kingdom, consumers are rulers. It is so pure a form of economic democracy that in fact it doesn't have any built-in system to discriminate between ugly or beautiful consumer preferences, moral and immoral consumer preferences. It tends to supply the goods and services that people want to buy. These goods and services may be immoral by some moral judgments, and therefore the individual who demand them may be immoral. But the capitalist system is, in this sense, amoral. It is a technology. It is a way to solve the economic problem by satisfying people's wants. Third myth about capitalism being immoral is the notion that capitalism encourages greed. And this is a very widespread notion that sounds very plausible because, as I have myself explained, capitalism is about people seeking profits and by seeking profits, satisfying consumer preferences. Now, the issue is that capitalism is not, greed is not a capitalist motive, it is a human motive. Wherever there are human beings, there is greed. Now, the issue is what economic systems is best positioned to hold greed in check. In economic systems where some people are in charge, such as socialism or feudalism, socialism where politicians and bureaucrats decide how resources should be allocated, or feudalism in which it is the social hierarchy that defines who gets what, those who are in charge, the greed of those who are in charge is unchecked. In capitalist society, the greed is not eliminated, but the profit motive tends to direct the greed of individuals to the satisfaction of other people's preferences, as I have explained. So the greed exists, but it is channeled to the satisfaction, to the service of other people. This is the meaning of the famous quote by Adam Smith in the Wealth of Nations. Many of you will probably remember that. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Let's now move to the fourth myth about capitalism being immoral, and it is the notion that capitalism increases poverty. This is perhaps the biggest myth of all, because the opposite is true, and it is true before our very eyes. The last 20 years have seen some previously underdeveloped countries such as China and India joining the world capitalist system, and this has enabled millions of people to be lifted out of poverty in these countries. But if we look at our own history, according to reliable calculations made in the case of Britain, the earliest capitalist country, the average participant in the British economy today has a real income per head that is 16 times higher than it used to be in pre-industrial time. So after busting this fourth myth, I think we can conclude that capitalism is not immoral. It is more moral than many other economic systems, be it socialism or feudalism, but it is not, can we really say that it is moral? As I have explained, it doesn't have any built-in system of morality to select between consumer preferences. Therefore, we can argue that capitalism needs to be moralized from outside, but there are different ways of doing that. And I think historically there have been two ways conceptualized. One is moralization from above, I would say, and this is a remedy that has been particularly popular in progressive leftist circles, and it's basically the idea that government has to intervene. Since capitalism is not inherently moral and government has to regulate it, it has to restrict people's freedom in order to make it moral. So in our case, for example, if people want to consume drugs, this should be banned. If people want to consume pornography in some societies, this should be banned. Another possible solution, which is not much discussed nowadays, but it has been popular in more conservative Christian democratic circles, is the idea of a moralization from below. From below and from within, in fact. From within, meaning from the morals of the capitalists themselves. We have not always lived in capitalist societies that were characterized by extreme individualism and social fragmentation. Capitalism in the 19th century was a very Christian capitalism. Capitalists accumulated a lot of money, but they also felt an obligation to benefit the social environment in which they lived. And, for example, the history of American capitalism in the 19th century, early 20th century is full of people who gave away all their wealth after death, building hospitals, building public libraries, leaving endowments. Let's think about Carnegie, for example. He founded universities, libraries, hospitals, endowments for peace around the world, which still exist to a large extent nowadays. So the morals of the capitalists themselves in a society that values them, in the case we are discussing in a society that was still Christian, play a role. And also the embeddedness of capitalism in community life plays a very important role. The fact that we are part of an ecosystem of a community of families and civil associations and people that we know, that we have a bond with and we feel related to and we want to help. And this mitigates the most corrosive aspects of economic competition and capitalism. So let's just recap. First, capitalism is not about capital. It is about people, it is about consumers and competition and prices and profits. Second, Capitalism does not empower the few. On the contrary, it's a form of economic democracy that empowers the many. Third, capitalism does not encourage greed. In fact, it holds greed in check, better than any other known economic system. Fourth, capitalism does not increase poverty. In fact, it reduces it, and reduces it dramatically. It has reduced it dramatically, both in the West and in underdeveloped countries nowadays.
That was today's episode of Europe Out Loud. Subscribe to our podcasts for more.